Morning.
Welcome.
Good morning. So I was having lunch with Dan, the CEO of the league, and he says, James, I want you to speak at the convention. And I was like, about what? He says, well, I want you to talk about what local government's going to look like in the next 30 years. And I thought about it. I said I couldn't think of a least qualified, less credentialed person to talk about the next 30 years, given that I had just turned 30 and that most of you have been doing this for probably longer than 30 years. And so I thought about it. I thought, well, maybe I could share a little bit about what I've experienced in my short time in public policy. And maybe we have a few stories in common. And so I thought I'd start out from the beginning when I first became a city manager. That was actually in the village of Lakeview in 2008. I was 23 years old, and if I look young and naive, it's because I was. Complete deer in headlights, absolutely terrified. You know, it's your first community, you really want to do a bang-up job, and so there I am. And I took office in June, and over the course of the next few months, I started reading these headlines. Did this happen in your community? Do we all recognize these headlines? And so, you know, it's like, okay, so I've been on the job for like 3 to 6 months, and I'm starting to think the wheels are starting to come off this thing. You know, revenue sharing's getting cut, our assessment rolls are dropping, I'm a kind of an analytical numbers guy, this isn't looking good. And, you know, the village of Lakeview is a gorgeous community on the banks of Tamarack Lake, just an absolutely beautiful place. And in the summertime, it's an amazing place to just take a walk. And I was young, I was single at the time, I didn't have kids, and so in the evenings, I would walk down the main streets, up and down the street, at a beautiful downtown. And I knew that things were getting bad, as in my walks, every other week or so, a new house would pop up with the foreclosure sign. And at one point, I remember I was looking down a city block, and I saw 6 homes in foreclosure. And the one thing about working in a small community is that when a factory closes down or a small business, you know, shuts its doors, chances are you know the name and face and story to that person. And so this was real personal to me. And I would walk in the evenings, and I knew that our village president, Ed Winter, I think he's here today someplace, I knew that he lived right on Main Street. And so I knew that if I staged my walk right around 6:30 or 7, I would always stop by their house on my walk or bike ride home. And his wife was from Germany, she's an amazing cook. And I knew that if I lingered long enough, his wife, Chris, would say, well, you know, dinner's ready, James, you want to stay for dinner? Well, of course. And so we would sit and have these amazing meals, and then Ed would always invite me out to his back porch. This is actually Ed's back porch. And he would pour me a glass of the cheapest bourbon you would ever imagine. And we would sit there and talk for hours. And if there's one thing I learned young in public policy, managers and mayors and council members, you got to get close. We talked so much that I knew exactly what he was thinking, and he knew exactly what I was thinking. And Ed was one of the most positive people you will ever meet. You know, I'd sit there and say, Ed, listen, I don't want to get you alarmed here, but things aren't looking good. Like, the wheels are coming off it. And he would say, James, steady as she goes, stick to our core principles. I know the character of our people. We're going to get through this. And so we thought, well, you know, inside our borders, it appears there's not enough resources to address this. So we thought maybe there's others out there kind of like the village of Lakeview. And maybe there's others that are having some financial issues. So we stepped back and looked, and oh my God, there were other communities around us. We have Howard City and Stanton and Greenville and Edmore, all these other communities in the region. And what's interesting about the village of Lakeview and Howard City and the city of Stanton is that if you took away the name and just took the demographics and overlaid them on top of each other, they're almost identical. They had so much in common. And we thought, well, we're so much alike, maybe we could work with each other to kind of save a dime here and there. Maybe there's some potential. And so we worked with the communities around us. We developed a shared service agreement for city management. I became the manager of the city of Stanton, the village of Lakeview at the same time. We developed local partnerships with our school districts for school resource officers and joint funding. We did mutual aid for public works so that when an issue arose in Stanton, Lakeview, and Howard City could all come to the aid. We did joint purchasing of equipment and resources. I always have the wood chipper here. The village of Lakeview and the city of Howard City bought a wood chipper together. It's small, but it represents the fundamentals of good government. And we all had our own little wastewater systems, and we paid a fortune for testing, and we thought maybe it's something as simple as we could all just share the same lab. We saved thousands and thousands of dollars in our water and sewer fund. And one of the pictures I'm most proud of is this picture here. This is Mayor Monica Tissue Dawes, and those are actually township supervisors. That's how bad the recession got. The townships came to play ball with us, and I knew it got bad. We were going to build a new public safety building. And I said, it's going to serve the region. Maybe we can get the township officials to do it. And they said, no, townships never work with the city, and the cities won't work with the township. It doesn't happen. And I said, why? And no one gave us an answer. And we reached out to the township officials, and we signed a joint funding agreement and built a brand new public safety building for the region. And it was like, I'm very proud of that. It's very small. It's a small little public safety building, but it showed cooperation. And we learned to build new relationships. And we also built new relationships with our private investment in the community and our citizens. We developed new public-private partnerships. Our DDA developed a building rehabilitation and facade grant program that helped rehabilitate our downtown businesses. We made key investments in the LEDs. Everyone's buying the LED lights. Our hospitals did fundraising to build a new emergency room and build on additional healthcare facility. Our citizens raised money for much-needed capital improvements in our parks and recreations. We simply didn't have the funds to do it. And we started realizing that we couldn't do it on our own, so we formed all these relationships. And meanwhile, I'll talk about Port Huron, because I'm now the city manager of Port Huron. In Port Huron, the business leaders, the civic leaders, the county leaders, the private investors, they all got in a room, and they looked out around the state, and they came to the conclusion, there's not a lifeboat coming. Nobody's coming to save us. We have to figure this out for ourselves. And so they developed the Blue Meets Green Leadership Council, which consisted of mostly private businesses with our elected officials, and they set 31 benchmark economic development goals. And they developed a strategic economic development plan. And out of those 31 goals, 22 have been achieved, creating millions of dollars of private investment in our community, and more importantly, thousands of new jobs, giving our residents hope and a future. And what's great about the village of Lakeview, the city of Stanton, and Port Huron is none of this is unique. What I've just told you is not something remarkably impressive to this group of people, because we have all done this. In fact, state treasury reports that more than 2,000 shared service or collaboration agreements have been inked and deployed in the state of Michigan in just a few short years, in almost every community. What we did what people said government couldn't do. We were supposed to be the dinosaur that was just the old archaic dinosaur that dies off, but we didn't. We innovated, we collaborated, we educated ourselves, we came together, and we reformed government and how we deliver services. And that's something we should all be very proud of. And we've learned in the last few years, what we've learned, all these new relationships, these methods of collaboration, of delivering services, we're going to need to take those lessons. And those partnerships must become marriages, and collaboration must become regionalism, because we have real challenges in the next 30 years. And I believe that our actions in the next 5 to 10 years will define how the next 30 years in our community look. And I want to talk about a challenge that Port Huron's facing, because I think maybe we'll find some similarities with other communities. And that's unfunded liabilities. The city of Port Huron has unfunded liabilities, and that's the difference between what we have in the bank versus what we owe. North of $54 million of unfunded liabilities in our pension fund. We pay about $3.75 million a year in our ARC payment, up 65% in just the last 6 years. In addition to the $54 million of unfunded liabilities in the pension, we have north of $47 million of unfunded liabilities in our OPEBs, post-retiree health care benefits. The contribution for that is about $3.25 million a year. Our ARC payment this year was about $7 million. And that payment is projected to grow to $8.2 million within the next 24 to 36 months. We have a total unfunded liability of more than $100 million. Just to give you a size and scope of what that looks like, this is our ARC payment in comparison to what we pay for police coverage. The growth of our ARC payment is consuming more and more resources that could be going towards parks and recreation, public safety, and general government. For every employee we pay $1 to, we have a 70% fringe cost. So for every $1 we pay an employee, 70 cents has to go into the fringe benefit fund. Out of that 70 cents, 34 cents goes to the current employee, what we currently pay the current employee, their health care, their pension, their fringe. The remaining 36 cents goes towards legacy cost, to employees we no longer have here. Our OPEBs and our pension ARC payment is projected to grow to north of $12 million by 2029 if nothing's done. And what's terrifying about this is the growth of the ARCs are outpacing our economic expansion and our revenue growth. So it's unsustainable. Just like all the other stories that were not unique, nor is this. In fact, governments as a whole in the state of Michigan have a combined unfunded liabilities of $136 billion. That's municipalities, schools, the state, $136 billion. The city of Port Huron, and just like communities all across the state, have taken some pretty bold actions, and I want to talk about that. We've created some pretty unique partnerships with our union and non-union employee groups. We adjust our health care coverage. Employees are now paying higher co-pays, higher deductibles. They're paid just like all of you. We adjusted the health care, and for our retiree health care costs as well. In fact, all of our employees now pay in additional wages, about between 8 and 11% of their wages now goes towards their pension, up from a goose egg almost 2 or 3 decades ago. And our retirees, all new hires are going into what's called a healthcare savings plan rather than healthcare retiree, which will help with the ARC payment growth. And we've also done the wage freezes, moderate growth. We made the wage adjustments. One of the most important things we've done is in the last 12 months, we've had to reduce general fund government by an additional $1.5 million to account for the operational deficit of about $500,000, but then to account for the growth of the ARC payments. This was difficult. In fact, we addressed this with my first 12 months on the job, and a lot of people said, well, you were really worried about the politics of the decisions that are being made. I was directed by the mayor and council. Our focus isn't on the next 12 months or on the future political consequences. Our focus should be on the next generation. How do we build a stronger, more prosperous future for the next generation? And that's why we made those difficult decisions. In addition to making those very difficult decisions, the mayor and council authorized me to begin making an additional $500,000 down payment on our unfunded liabilities, in addition to our growing ARC payment. And we realized that by doing that, for every $1 we invest today, and our plan will inject about $7.5 million into our funds. In 15 years, that will result in north of about $14 million. So for every $1 we invest today into paying down our unfunded liabilities, that's $2. That's $2 that these kids will have to build their own future. We cannot predict the future. That's one thing I've learned in my short time in public policy going through a recession is we can't predict the future. We are not the great wizards we'd sometimes like to think we are. And if there's one thing I've learned from watching our citizens is that prosperity doesn't come from government. It comes from freedom. Free enterprise, free markets, but most importantly, free people. And as mayors and council members and administrators, we need to come together today to free the next generation from the crushing burden of unfunded liabilities. And it starts by asking 3 questions. And we need to ask these questions now because under the new Gadsby regulations, your unfunded liabilities are going to be bullet pointed out in your next audit. and the community is going to start talking about it. And the first question all of us should ask when we go back to our offices on Monday is, what is our total unfunded liabilities? And then the question is what is our annual contribution? And then the third question, and I would highly recommend, before answering the third question, you go to Lakeview, Michigan, have a glass of bourbon with Ed. Because the third question will bring you nothing but blood, sweat, and tears. And that's, what are we going to do about it? And for each community, that answer is going to look very different. And I know that answering these questions are going to be incredibly difficult. But if there's one thing I've learned in the last 9 years of doing this, is that, I know the answers to this question get difficult. And we've had to face them in Port Huron, and I know in Port Huron, just like in Port Huron, I know someplace in Coldwater or Muskegon or Traverse City or Tecumseh, I know there's a hard-working mom or dad out there just trying to get on with their life. And they're looking at you and me, the leaders of this great state, and they're saying, hey, we didn't create this problem. Why should we have to fix it? And the only answer I have is that Providence placed us in this moment in time, in this place in history, and we need to do it for the next generation. And on all the difficult decisions we've had to make in the recession, and we've had to make in the last budget year, the one thing I've learned is that if we lead on these issues, and our courage is strong and our spirit is right, I really believe that the people of this great state will stand with us. Thank you.